Hi, welcome back to the Angler Journey podcast. I'm your host, McKenna Kirchhoff, and today I'm so excited to be here with Carter Rohrer. We are going to talk about some fun stories and really his journey of entrepreneurship that started way back in high school. So thank you so much, Carter, for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
It's going to be so fun. So first of all, just give us a little bit of details about who you are, what year you are, etc.
So yeah, my name's Carter Rohrer. I'm a junior here at UNL, Ag Econ major, and with the Angler minor, of course. Yeah, that's
who you are.
Yeah,
perfect.
I guess.
That's great. No, that's perfect. So you are the proud owner of Holland Hay. Tell us what you do, because even after I've known you for a while, I didn't really know what the details of your business were.
Yeah, that's a long one. So basically, my business is Holland Hay. I started that when I was, I believe, 15 or 16. And what I do, basically, is I put up hay in the grand scheme of things, which sounds simple, but there's a lot to it. I do some custom work, which involves putting up hay, basically, and then the customer takes it all. I do some stuff on shares. I do cash rent. I do contracts with the state. A little bit of everything is kind of how it works. And also, I have kind of as a branch or subsidiary of Holland Hay, I sell twine and net wrap, Swanson Ag Wraps product. I got a dealership for that. That's
so awesome. So putting up hay, define that for those of us that
Yes. So putting up hay, essentially, livestock, they got to have feed. Hay is the feed for most livestock, ruminants and horses and such. Horses, goats, they eat hay. And basically, hay is a preserved grass, is what it is. And then there's also forage, which is more so, hay is a dry product, and your forage would be your wetter product, like silage, something of similar. And basically, you cut the grass or alfalfa. There's many other crops you can use, different types of grasses. I could go on for all day about that. And you cut it, you let it dry, you rake it and bale it, and you hope it don't rain in between, and you hope 90 other environmental factors don't ruin everything you started.
Oh, okay. Seems simple and easy. Well, I'm really excited to get into some of your stories about maybe things not going the way that you had planned. So Carter and I actually knew each other before the Angler program. We both graduated from Norris High School, which is about 20 minutes, 30 minutes south of town here. But you didn't come until you were a freshman, and I'm a year above you. So why did your family move to the area?
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting story. Originally, I'm from the Creighton Verdigris area, which those of you that don't know, it's up in the far northeast corner of Nebraska, up by the South Dakota border, by the Missouri River. And my father came from family operation. My grandfather farms. I'm a fifth-generation farmer. My father farmed up there on the side, and then as well, he was a banker. He sold crop insurance and had an auction. Excuse me. He auctioneered and had a real estate and farm management business. Has a real estate and farm management business. And with that, basically, we farmed and had cattle up there, and that was kind of the side gig, I would say, for him. His main thing was his real estate and farm management business. And I also have two little brothers with special needs. They have Down syndrome. One has Down syndrome and autism, and then some other health conditions. But basically, how we ended up down here is the youngest. They're, I believe, now they're 18 and 16, I believe. And the younger one, 16, he's adopted from Ukraine. We adopted him when he was 2 years old. Oh. And basically up there, there wasn't as many opportunities for them, and they're far away from their doctors. And my parents, both of them, they wanted them to have more opportunities and just to be close to their doctors. So we ended up kind of putting a pause on the farming up there. My father did. He kept the land, rented it out. We sold the cattle and moved on here, and which is great. Going to the Norris school system, definitely adjustment. I went from a class of, I think, 28 all the way up to 176, somewhere in that area. And that was definitely an adjustment. And previously, I'd spent my whole life up there up until it was 2016 when we moved down here.
Wow.
And big adjustment. And yeah, moved to Holland, Nebraska. It's unincorporated. So, but yeah, that's kind of how we ended up down here.
That's so awesome. I mean, kind of crazy story to be, you're a bit older than your brothers, obviously. And so you were going into your freshman year, I believe, when you first moved to Norris. So really got to do high school with us. But other than that, your whole life had been elsewhere. So with leaving the farm and having that whole move happen, how did you get into baling hay?
Yeah, so we moved down here, and farming is one of those things, anyone who's done it can attest that once you get it in your blood, it's kind of a hard bug to get out. We moved down here, and I missed it a lot. I'd done it all my life. That's kind of all I knew. And we moved on an acreage, about 40 acres, and it had about 15 acres of grass on it. And my father, when we moved down here, he sold most of the farm equipment. We had a corn, soybean, row crop operation up there, not a hay operation. And he sold most of the equipment, but he kept a couple older tractors, 4020 and a 3020. And he basically told me, he goes, well, I don't have any use for this ground. We don't have any cattle. If you want to hay the ground, you can use my tractors. You can go. You're gonna have to buy the rake, the mower, and the baler, but you can use these old tractors. I mean, they were nothing special, but it was something. And he goes, you can put that. You pay the taxes, and I'm not going to give you any money for college, but whatever you get off of that, whatever profit, you can keep that, use it as your college fund, but I'm not giving you any money. And that's kind of how it all started. And basically, I started with that, and about the same time, how I started, I guess, was I bought an old junk sickle mower for $500, I think, and then borrowed my neighbor's rake, and then got an old square baler as well. And this equipment was nothing fancy; it was falling apart. But for my 15 acres, it worked, kind of, sort of, on a good day.
That's awesome. And you were like 15 at the time?
Yeah, maybe? I was 15. Yeah. Yep. And
15 acres for a 15-year-old, that's no big deal.
Yeah. It was just kind of something. I mean, it didn't make a whole lot of money, but it got me started. And at the same time, when we first moved down here, I detasseled. That was interesting. It's a lot of work, detasseling is. And then also at the same time, that same summer, I started working for a local horse farm. I got to know through my neighbor. They race horses, Stillwaters. They're just in Hickman there. Yeah. And they were throwing hay and stuff. And I asked them, I'm like, hey, do you guys need some hay? And they're like, yeah, we're always looking for some. And I'm like, well, if I put this up, would you buy it? And they said, yeah. So I got that square bale. And that's kind of what really got the whole thing going. So I started with square bales, and, we were all hand thrown. I threw them all by hand at the time on a wagon. I mean, it was old fashioned. Now it's a lot more mechanical, and I run accumulators and stuff, and there's a lot less hand labor, because the labor finding, you can only kind of twist your friends' arms to come in and throw in bales so many times before they're just like, well, I don't really want to do that.
Right.
And I started running into that issue. So we had to go a different direction. But that was a couple years down the road.
That's awesome. Wow. So such an interesting community that we have down there, because there are so many people. There are a lot of people that own horses, and we have a lot of farm ground. Our school is literally in the middle of a cornfield, or multiple cornfields, but it's definitely a farming community. But you didn't actually have the land to farm, so you got to do something else, which I love. So when did you have the shift from it being more of a side gig where you're just making a little bit of money to really taking it serious? I know, you kind of got a couple years under your belt, but then you had a pretty big year in 2019. So I'd love to hear some of those stories. Yeah,
so basically it all kind of started, I can kind of attribute it to Randy Tim, he was my local seed dealer at the time. And I was at FFA one day, FFA deal at Norris, and he walked up to me and goes, hey, we're kind of looking for some help over spring break. We had a week-long spring break coming up. He goes, would you like to come give me a hand, wash some seed tenders, nothing crazy, just kind of manual labor, stuff that you have a 15-year-old kid do.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, it sounds good. I don't have anything better to do. So I went and did that. And then spring break got over, and I get a call the next day. Hey, where you at? And I'm like, well, I thought we were done. And he goes, well, we could still use your help. Come on back. So I came on back, and then through that, he really never asked me to leave. And it kind of turned into a full-time job during the summer. I loaded crop dusters. I mean, in the summer, I loaded crop dusters and all of that, and delivered chemical to customers once I was 16. And then in the spring, I helped a lot with the seed deliveries. Got to know all the customers and stuff. And, they'd come in for more seed, and I'd load them up and then shoot the breeze with them a little bit, some while they were there. And through that, I just got to know a lot of people. And fast forward, working there after a couple years, he walks up to me and he goes, "Hey, so you knew I kind of had this hay business going on." He goes, "How serious are you about this?" And I go, "Well, I kind of enjoy it." And he goes, "Okay, all right, we're going to lunch." And I'm like, "Okay, we're going to lunch." So we end up in Beatrice, Nebraska, at a Mexican restaurant. There's a local farmer, and I met him before. Ron DeBoer was his name. You might know him, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And got to chatting with him. And recently, a local dairy had been bought out in our area. And how that tied into me was he was transitioning to his farm to organic. And when you transition to organic, there's a 3-year transition period where you have to have you can't have chemical use, but you also can't sell it as an organic crop. So the ideal crop to do that is alfalfa, because it really helps with weed retention once you get a good stand. So basically, this dairy was going to come in and chop it and use it for their dairy, but they got bought out, and this is like the 3rd week of May, and alfalfa should be cut around the 2nd week of May. And this DeBoer, he didn't have anyone to do it. And he's like, "Well, would you be interested in doing it?" And I agreed. And I had agreed to 130 acres of bottom ground alfalfa with equipment from the 1960s, and basically agreed to a job. I had none of the equipment to make it happen, and it needed cut yesterday.
Oh, that's good. So wait, how many acres were you doing on average before?
I was still probably under 100 of grass. And that's an important clarification, because grass is not as much of a time-sensitive crop, and you only get 1, maybe 2 cuttings of grass. Alfalfa, you're talking 4 to 5 a year in our area. So It's a heck of a lot more commitment. And I had none of the equipment to make it happen. It was all worn-out equipment from the 50s and 60s. It barely even got what little bit I had done.
Wow. Look at that.
Yeah. So after walking out of there, I'm like, all right, I got some things to figure out. So I asked my seed dealer, I'm like, "Hey, I need tomorrow off. I got to go visit the bank." So I had known from being in Northeast Nebraska since I was a little kid, I had known a banker in the area, Brunswick State Bank. They're a small bank, 2 locations. They do a lot of stuff off a handshake still. And so I rode with my dad up there, and he dropped me off, and he went and did his thing, and I met with my banker. And, I think I was probably 16 at the time. I was somewhere in that area, 16, 17. And for some reason, he agreed to give a 16-year-old kid $40,000 to go buy equipment. I don't know why he agreed to do that, but he did. So I guess he must have saw a reason to take investment in me. So I went and bought a round baler. And then I couldn't find the rake I wanted at the time, so I hired out. I knew some other guys putting up hay. I custom hired a guy to swath it and rake it in the first cutting. And then later on in the summer, I bought a rake. And I also, additionally, at that same time, I upgraded small square balers. I needed one that could run for more than an hour without falling apart.
Wow, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it all got started.
Yeah. And so that summer, was that the summer of 2019?
Yes, that was the summer of 2019. And I will say, if there was a year to not get into the hay business, 2019 was it. So as many people were aware, 2019 was a very wet year. There was a lot of flooding, a lot of unpredicted rains, and a lot of heavy rains. And anyone who's in the hay business can tell you that hay and water do not mix. That is oil. That's oil and water. It's fire and gasoline. Not a mixture you want. One untimely rain can cost you thousands of dollars and ruin the crop.
Oh,
and
did you experience that?
Boy, did I.
Tell us
Boy, did
more.
I.
I want to hear all of it.
So yeah, starting 2019. So I agreed to that, and fast forward, I think 3 days later, the guy was out there cutting it. I went and bought a baler. Dealership was out there setting up. We were going in first cutting. We cut it. It already got rained on. It got rained on that next night, and it generally takes 4 to 5 days in our area to dry alfalfa. Sometimes less if it's really warm, but first cutting 4 to 5 days to dry that down. And we weren't even close. It wasn't even close to be ready to get baled on. It got rained on, but it was still kind of salvageable. And then got out there, had that guy rake it, and as soon as I started baling, it rained again. And so we got shut down for another couple days, let it dry out, flipped it, started baling, and then the baler broke down, the brand new baler. Well, not new to me, baler. And it was interesting. And we eventually got it done. It was basically manure by the time it was done. I sold it for less than what it cost me to bale it, but it was manure basically at that time. And I'm still trying to stay optimistic. You know, we got 3 more cuttings to get this right. Well, second cutting, it didn't go much better. It all got rained on again. And then and after that second cutting, it started just pouring rain, and we got to third cutting. And I went and spent some money spent another $12,000 on basically an inoculant setup. And essentially it was to preserve the hay, and it would allow me to bale at higher moistures, which would basically preserve the hay when baled wet.
Okay.
And I'm like, yeah, this is the ticket. You know, we're kicking ass.
Because it was wet all the time, so solving a problem.
Yeah. And so we did this, and I got like 2/3 of it baled. And then it started raining, which, and I remember I sat down at that point. I mean, it was a lot of alfalfa balings done at night for leaf retention. 2/3 so basically with alfalfa, it's a legume, and with that plant, 2/3 of the value of it comes from the leaves.
Okay.
And how you keep those leaves on that plant is by baling it at night.
Why?
Because the dew sets in at night, and it's just like, so think of it like crunching on leaves in the fall. So you go out in your lawn in the afternoon, there's leaves all over. It's crunchy. Right. You go out there first thing in the morning, it's wet. The leaves don't crunch. They're soft. Okay. And essentially that moisture will wick out of a bale. Dew moisture will. Stem moisture won't. And that's a different story. The leaves dry out a lot faster than the stem.
Huh. Interesting.
So that's why a lot of it's done at night. There's a lot of burning the midnight oil when baling hay, and you know, there's a saying in the hay industry: if the moisture's right, we go all night, and that is a very true statement. And when it was midnight, 1 o'clock, and it just starts pouring rain. And at that point, I mean, I was in over my head. Here I am. I'm 16 years old. I got $40,000 bank note, plus the $12,000 setup I bought. And then on top of that, all these other local farmers were talking to my landlord. I mean, stuff gets around. That's another thing in life. If you think saying things between someone else doesn't get out, it does. You know, it does. You got to watch what you say with everything. You know, loose lips sink ships. And I mean, that stuff got back to me. It always does. Everything gets around. And they were all, you know, I was the new kid on the block. And there's this punk 16-year-old kid, has the best farm ground in the area, and it's a mess. I mean, he's basically pulling his rake through a field, and it looks more like a plow going through because the field's so wet in that bottom. And he, you know, like, we could do such a much better job. And I just sat down. I mean, when it started raining, I was done. I mean, I don't know what I was going to do. And I needed to clear my mind for a moment. So I got on my phone. And that was definitely one of the lowest points I've ever been, like, in my business and also in life. Like, that was an incredibly stressful situation for me. Yeah. And I come across this quote from The Boy, the Horse, the Fox, and the Mole. And there's this boy, I was on Instagram, and there's this boy, he's sitting on this horse, and they come up to this forest. And the boy says to the horse, "I can't see a way through." And the horse responds to the boy, "Well, can you see your next step?" And the boy says, "Yes." And the horse says to the boy, "Then just take that." And that was something I really needed in that moment, because I really needed to hear that. And that kind of really changed my perspective on things. Everything was going wrong. And there's going to be those points in life. Everyone's going to have them, whether it be your grades, someday your family and life, your business. There's going to be points where you hit a wall. But if you can just sit down and go, okay, yeah, I'm in this shitty situation, but what's the best possible decision I can make right now? What can increase my odds of success? And with that, I was like, okay, well, this sucks. We're going to try again tomorrow. And at that same time, which added on to the stress, is I had, that next morning, I had $14 in my bank account. I needed that to go right. I had a buyer lined up for the hay if it went right. Because I had empty tractors. I didn't even know how I was going to fill up the tractors the next day. But again, it's just taking that next step.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, I wake up and my mom goes, hey, this check came in the mail. And that was a check from a customer that was like 2 or 3 months overdue. I was not expecting that. And I went and cashed that check in the bank and was able to fill up the tractors, and it kept me going another week. And yeah, and that's really what it was. And, fourth cutting, I got there. I'm like, okay, we have to figure out how to make some money somehow if we're going to pay the bank. And I got to thinking, like, well, that's when I shifted towards square bales, because we're in this area. So essentially square bales, they're traditionally in the hay business, there's big square bales, round bales, and small squares. Your round bales are very popular in the Nebraska area. Big square bales, they're very profitable. They're more profitable than rounds because you can truck them. The trucking's easy on those. And they're very easy to ship. But the problem is it's a $500,000 setup, and I'm still not to the point where I can justify spending that kind of money on just that method of baling hay. There's also small square bales, which small square bales, they are incredibly inefficient to bale when compared to round bales, but you can sell them at a premium. You can sell them at about 2 to 3 times the margins that you can sell round bales at. So I'm like, okay, we're going to pivot. And fourth cutting, thank God, I think that's another thing. Fourth cutting, we had the right weather, and we were able to nail it out of the park. We had a good window. We got it all done, and I small square baled it all. And yeah, it ended up working great. Just doing that salvaged my entire year. And it was one of those things where I think I've been too lucky in life, or fortunate enough to believe that, God doesn't play a role in our lives, whatever you call it. It's this weird thing where I found where when your back is against a wall and you're trying really hard, life has a way of throwing you a bone. If you just put in the effort, something good will become of that, and life will say, hey, whether that's God or whatever you believe in, he'll be like, hey, this person's trying. Yeah. And he goes, we're going to come a little bit of a break. And that was the break for me. And I forgot to mention that setup that I bought for the setup I bought for the preservative on the hay, were 2/3 that didn't get rained on. It wasn't set. It had some calibration issues from the factory, and that hay all molded up as well. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just money down the drain.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot of really good information, because it really does. Like, sometimes you're in a corner and there's no way out, and somehow something happens. So, if I remember correct, you were told no 16 times? Yeah,
so, yes.
Yes. To clarify, was that for this fourth cutting of hay?
So it was for some other hay.
Okay.
With the same customer.
Yeah. Okay.
So essentially, with that, I had all this hay I was sitting on, and I'm like, okay, I was sitting on it all, and I had it listed on Facebook, and I couldn't find a buyer for it. So one day I'm sitting in, I think, my welding class in high school, and I go over in the corner where there's one little spot you get cell phone reception in the Norris welding shop. And I sit there and I look up a list of dairies in Nebraska. And I'm like, all right, we got to get this hay sold. It was February, March. I'm like, we got to get it sold. and it's getting to that time of year, and I don't know where I'm going to sell it, but we're not having any luck with what we're doing.
Right.
So I look up a listed areas in Nebraska, and I think there were 20 on the list, and I called the first 16 calls I made, I got told no. And they're just like, no, not interested. But that 17th number I called, guy answers, and I talked to him for a little bit. He goes, yeah, I'll take everything you got. And he goes, you sound like a good guy. I know I've never met you, but you seem pretty straightforward. I appreciate what you're doing. And he goes, I'm going to give you this price. This is the best price I've given anybody this year, but I feel like you deserve it. And that was another instance of life just throwing me a bone. Because he didn't know me. He had no reason to do that, but he did. And that's one of those things, you know, in life, you never know. The answer is always going to be no if you don't ask. And if you ask and get told no, okay, what are you out? At the end of the day, what are you out? And there's another quote I think of. I'm big on quotes. That's
okay. We love them. We love quotes here.
There's another quote, and if you wanted to be a millionaire, and I told you got to get told no 50 times before you be a millionaire, how excited would you be to get that next no? And whether that's 50, 100, 150 in life, if you want something, just go and ask. Yeah, go and ask. Because people aren't, you gotta make your own opportunities. You know, you don't know unless you ask.
Right.
And that was a huge learning lesson for me. You know, worst case people are normally going to say is no. Some might say it more politely than others.
Right. But
what are you out?
It's a no. It's an answer to your question, and you asked it. So, yeah, I 100% agree. It's so important to get over that fear of rejection almost. It always is scary to be rejected, but it leads you on to, okay, well, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. So being able to continue and persevere. Now, that was a very stressful situation to do that in, but you didn't really have another option. So being able to do that and get to that 17th call paid off. It really did. So to pivot a little bit, I know that was a really big year for you, and that was your junior year of high school. I only know this because I graduated a year before you. So that year I graduated. But what got you into that niche market of square baling? That's kind of the direction I want to go, because I think that's a really interesting. A lot of people can just bail, but you've gotten to really know your customer base in a unique way.
Yeah. So what kind of got me into that? Like I said, primarily necessity, but that's what shifted my focus more towards it. But you got to sit there and you got to be willing to do things that everyone else isn't willing to do. If you want to differentiate yourself, you can't just say we're better just because we're better. You got to actually differentiate yourself and make yourself different from your competitors. And for me, that was small square baling. I'm like, okay, everyone's out here round baling. No one square bales anymore. I mean, there's very few people, especially doing it on a large scale in this area, but there's also a demand for it. And at the end of the day, you just got to run the numbers. And the numbers made sense for me. I mean, you're selling at almost 3 times the margin. If I didn't have the acres, I was just getting started out. But what got me ahead is I was more efficient with what square baling made me more efficient with what I already had.
Okay.
And that allowed me to get out there and really push and advance faster by being more efficient with what I have.
Right.
But you just really got to look for whatever that niche is in your area. Every industry has its niche, and especially if you're in it, it's easy to find. And if you don't know it, just ask your customers, what are they looking for,
right.
and then say to yourself, how can I provide that?
Yeah.
And for me, that was the small square bales, and that I wouldn't have even known that until I worked for that horse farm for a while.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a big thing, is just really being around your customers and understanding what they're looking for and what they do on a day-to-day basis. You know, you can't BS your customers when you got to be able to talk to them about their industry, because that's what they want to talk about. You know, someone comes up to me, I want to talk about hay, but if you act, yeah. But if you come up to me and start talking to me about hay and you don't know your stuff and you're just making it up, I'm gonna be able to tell. I'm probably not gonna call you out on it, but but I'm going to be able to tell. And it's the same thing when you're talking to your customers. You got to know your industry, and you got to be an expert of that industry.
Yeah.
If you want to set yourself apart.
That makes sense, because it's really easy to break trust if you start saying things that aren't true and just
Absolutely.
just not being authentic. So, so I know that the last few years, those square baling, that kind of niche has really, you've focused on that. But you also have gotten to experience working with the government a little bit. So tell us how that happened, because it's a little bit random, but, and what did that actually look like? What were you providing for them?
Yeah. So basically, being south of Lincoln, you would know as well, and anyone in this area can tell you, there's a ton of construction on the south side of Lincoln, and it's terrible. It's impossible to get around. But, while I saw that ended up being a huge opportunity for me, that construction. When they first started that project, I had heard that they were looking for okay, I'm going to restart. Then explain.
You're fine.
So in the construction industry, with the EPA and all their regulations, when they tear up all the ground, they got to reseed it, and they got to cover that. They have to have something as basically bedding over that new seeding to keep the soil from washing. And what they use is hay or straw.
Well, that's convenient.
Yes, it is. And by happenstance, I was getting into the hay industry, and the largest construction project in the state of Nebraska to happen, the South Bypass, was just getting started. And I was driving by one day, and I saw some hay bales sitting out there. And I'm like, they probably need some hay, because I saw they were doing the seeding. So I'm like, well, I don't know who to call, but I saw big up on one of the cranes, Hawkins Construction, and a phone number on one of the trucks nearby. So I'm like, all right, we're going to call them. And I don't know, probably 7 phone calls later and like 2 days of voicemails and playing phone tag with people, I finally got in charge of the guy that was actually in charge of the seating, because it's all subcontracted out. And he goes, yeah, you got some? Bring some. We'll try it out. And I bring it. I showed up on time. I communicated well with him. And coincidentally, one of the guys that had been supplying later at the same time before me was not doing the same. He was not showing up when he said he was going to show up. And he was not answering his phone. And he goes, well, do you want to supply the rest of the job? And I'm like, sure. Again, one of those deals, I agreed to do that. And that whole project, I can't remember. They probably used around 3,000 bales for the whole project. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I agreed to it. And I, again, didn't have the product to do it. Kind of similar, I'm big on jumping off the cliff and building a plane on the way down.
Okay, I think we're going to get that through this interview.
Yeah.
But it's worked.
Yeah.
It's worked for you, even though it's a little different than how some people might say is the smarter, best way to do it. Mm-hmm. The smarter, best way to do something is the way that works for you. And you've really figured that out. So what are you've talked a little bit about, you have your quotes, but what are you had 3 things that you mentioned that were really important to keep those relationships intact, but also just to stay consistent as a business owner through a lot of adversity and change. Yep.
So really, one thing I really love is we had a speaker at Angler come in, Craig Gaina, and he said, business is easy, but people make it hard. Business is simple. Business is simple, but people make it hard. If you want to be successful in business, all you got to do is, 1, answer your damn phone. Answer your phone. It's not that hard. Answer your phone. Show up when you're going to say you're going to show up. Do what you say you're going to do, basically. And then, on top of that,
don't lie.
Sorry. Don't lie. Thank you. I forgot that third one.
You're good. I just love those.
Yeah. So show up, do what you say you're going to do, and don't lie. It's that simple. Just doing that will set you miles apart from your competitors. And it sounds so simple, but it can be hard. Once you grow in business, you'll find that out. Is that while it's simple, it is very hard to do that and be consistent. But if you can be consistent, you will have more business than you can handle. just doing those three things.
That can be a problem. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a good problem to have.
That's a great problem.
So what I want to know about the name of your business, because you're from Holland. Well, you're located out of Holland, but what made you want to adopt that as a name, even though, because that wasn't your hometown until you were older. So what made you think that was the right name? Yeah.
So like you mentioned, part of it was that, again, we're located right by Holland, a mile outside of Holland, but also I mentioned how I have those two little brothers with Down syndrome, and there's this childhood book, and I can't recall the name of it, but in the book, essentially the book is about explaining to children what it's like having a sibling with Down syndrome, and it equates Down syndrome to Holland, and basically what it says is when people have a sibling or a kid, they expect it to be like Paris. It's a beautiful thing, it's amazing. But when you have a child with Down syndrome, you go to Holland instead. And the thing about Holland is it's just, a lot of people don't glamorize it as much, but it's just as beautiful as Paris and just as amazing. Things are just a little bit slower there. And coincidentally, when we moved down here, we moved to the town of Holland, and that's just kind of the name that stuck out because those little boys are a big part of my life, and they always will be. So
that's so awesome. And it's something that, you don't have to talk about all the time. It doesn't, it makes sense. Okay, Holland Hay, you're from Holland, right? Like that's where you're located. But I just love that piece of your heart that you get to kind of carry with you as you're a business owner, and have gotten to grow significantly since being the 15-year-old that had a couple tractors he could run and permission from dad, right? So I just love that you've gotten to really grow through that. So what is your ideal customer? You talked a little bit about this when we had a conversation before, and I just love what you said. So get into that a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of people look at their ideal customer as someone who doesn't complain, is easy to get along with. That's what they look at their ideal customer. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. While they're great, they don't make you grow. My ideal customer is a customer who is very particular. And because the thing about a very particular customer is they'll point out the flaws in your business, where you're not doing as well as you could have, and what your shortcomings are as a business owner. They'll point it out, and you gotta have some thick skin to be able to listen to it and kind of humble yourself and take that criticism, because it's easy to just brush off, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They do. They do. They do. It's just like going to a restaurant. You go to a restaurant, if the experience is great, the food's great, everything's great, you're going to come back.
Right.
Same thing in the hay business and any business. If it's a great experience, they're going to come back.
Right.
And you got to listen to those critiques because that's how you grow. That's how you become a better business owner. And you just got to humble yourself enough not to just shrug it off. And you're great. It's awesome having easygoing customers, but they don't force you to grow. I wouldn't want every one of my customers to be as extremely particular. That might drive me insane.
Maybe it might make it not worth it,
but they're definitely necessary, and they're very important to listen to, I think.
That's really good. Well, it's like a little mirror for you. You can kind of take a look at what you're doing, because your customers are going to let you know. The ones that really care, they're going to let you know. So, last question. Well, I have two more questions. The last question, solely on Holland Hay, is what are your next steps? What's the future look like for your business?
So the next steps for my business, really what I want to do is essentially in the South they have these businesses. They're essentially like a retail store for hay. So like basically you look at Tractor Supply. I would like to do that for hay. I would like to put up a hay shed along a major highway, and through that, if you want to come and you want 2 bales or 2,000 bales, I have it. And you can come there and get it whenever, because that's where I see a gap in the industry currently, is for like me, especially being up at UNL, going all the way south of Lincoln, 40 minutes to sell 2 bales of hay. There's no profit to be had in that, and people are busy. Every producer's busy, and that's really hard for them to do. So that's where foresee the future and transitioning towards that. And additionally, there's some other markets. I'd like to get more into the jockeying and pushing the hay out, kind of being the middleman on some of that. Not all of it, but on some of it. And then I have some ideas with some other products I probably can't share right now.
That's
but
okay. It's
there's also
discreet.
some ideas there. Yes.
That's awesome. Okay, now my last question, and kind of what we do on this segment of the podcast is what keeps your fire in your belly going? Like what is what pushes you? And you talked about passion, but I just want to know your perspective on, like, as a business owner, what has kept your spark alive? Mm-hmm,
absolutely. And really, to me, in my business, it's not about the money. I mean, making money is important. I would say it's what I'm really passionate about. And I don't want to say it's not, I just said it wasn't about the money, but it's not completely about the money. If you're working to just make a profit in your business, it's not going to work. You can't just be profit oriented. You got to be relationships and customer oriented. But what really is my driving force is I want to make a difference in my community, as does everyone. And through my business, I think I can do that. As a business owner, you get to provide jobs. You get to provide jobs for the community, good jobs. And that can in turn feed their families.
Right.
And you can donate to your community. You can make a difference where you see fit. And really, my hay business is my vessel to do that.
Yeah.
And to inspire change in whatever way you see fit. And I mean, you can volunteer your time, and you can go, abroad and do mission trips, and that's great. And people need to do that. I'm not downplaying that at all. Mm-hmm. But to really make a difference, you do have to have a way to make money and inspire that change. And that's how you can make real, impactful, large differences fastly. Mm-hmm. To me, that's how I see it, I guess. So at the end of the day, I guess I was wrong when I said it's not about the money. It is about making money is very important because
it's not about the money for you.
Exactly. Yes.
It's money
precisely.
As a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't do any good sitting in a bank account, when I'm dead. So.
Right. I love that. Well, and giving back to your community it's so amazing because you have had that community shift, but you've gotten to spend a lot of time here in Engler and with our community and back home. But I just love getting to hear from you. You have a really interesting story, and I love that prioritizing giving back is a big deal to you. So thank you so much for joining us. This is awesome, and it was so fun to hear your story. I know there was so much we could have talked about, but I'm really happy with all the things we got to cover, and I'm excited that our community gets to hear from you via our podcast. So thank you very much for joining us today on the Fire in the Belly podcast. We will see you next week.